there are some basics of Substance Painter that I need to convey, or some techniques that are going to be used, which I thought would be worth highlighting. So I have a little, just a tiny little presentation here. So we have, first of all, how can we do such a convoluted and flaky height map, because the technique is going to be used everywhere in all these materials. So for starters, you could just take a source 1, blur slope that. Blur slope is a filter up here. And then you do an anchor point, and anchor points are just like a reference stamp. So whatever is below this layer will just be fed into this anchor point so that we can copy all that dynamically over to another layer. But we can also just, in any layer, we can just use the anchor points with itself. So how we are doing that here is to drag out these values. So we are slope blurring it with a custom noise and with itself. So we drag these values out, and that way we get these little tiny edges which are still separated via another grayscale value. So that way we get sort of like this styrofoam effect which can be used to oldify your metal, like it's some cold smith forged weapon. Another technique, how we can use it, is we can paint something and blur that, and then use another anchor point, slope blur it, then slope blur it again, and then slope blur it with itself again, so we get these little tiny cracks in here. And that way we can get some really interesting shapes and masks, or crunch effects, anything really. And another thing is how we can propagate a mask from a UV scene. So there are two methods for it. One is we can actually just take a generator that is called UV border distance. So that way it will just make a distance mask from the UV scene, which is super practical for many effects. And the legacy version of that would be that we have a paint layer where we make everything in our mesh white except the part that we want to have our distance mask. Then we bevel that, so that way we can get the bevel, we can get the distance mask. And then, I mean, now we have everything white and we have this part here. And then I just like to use a paint layer with subtract. There I just deselect everything. No, I just select everything with white. So everything that is white will be subtracted. And then I switch that over and just deselect the part where I want to have a mask still. So that way I can isolate my effect. All right, these are some of the basics I wanted to have pinned down before we go into the abomination that I call my smart material. Which is everything that is marked green. Just all right. So for starters, we would just start with a why is that still there? All right. So we would just start with a black base layer and roughness set to 0. And then my first effect was to create some of these veins. And these veins are fairly easy to do. We just take a crunch marble veins fill layer. So you just can look for that crunch marble. And then it's this one, actually. Or was it the large one? No, crunch marble veins. And I just tried to have the streaks be isolated as best as I could. You could also optionally take an anisotropic noise, and so technically you could also go in here, do an anisotropic noise with more like this and a bit of this and the levels, and then you just get these down. But we get a nicer effect with the crunch models because they also have a bit of randomization and they pinch towards the end, which is quite important. Then we blur them. And then we blur them with a directional blur. So a directional blur is a super funny blur because we can just tell it to have a direction in which it's going to be dragged out, all right? So that way we can make lines a bit thicker, for example. And then we just take a levels and manipulate that so we get a few highlights, a few faded ones, and a few where we have some intertwined, some bright and dark, bright, dark, and so on. Then we warp that with a Perlin noise, and then we do a blur slope on them. And that way we also get these twists here. And that actually gives us a really nice effect where some of these are shadowed. So this is just a base color. But due to the mask having different grayscale values, we do get these difference in colors. All right. Then we have this effect, which just gives us a bit more color depth. It's just a little bit of gray put into it with a galvanic large grunge map. Just the basic grunge map. Yeah. And after that, we take a crunch dusty powder white. What that does is it's kind of hard to just get it right. So to switch these masks, these channels, I just press C, just so you know that. So yeah, let's activate that. I also don't know why I don't have the. Oh, never mind. It's just there. Sorry. So yeah, it does this. So I really liked about that it has some concentrated areas and some of these spicks and specks all scattered around, so that way we can simulate a bit of uneven glass, I would say. Then I take a crunch wipe brushed large one. It's also just another crunch map that you can just put in there, which does exactly that. So we get a bit of these wiped streaks. And after that, a very important effect will be this one. So what this does, let me just All right, so what this does is it has these swirly and super random values all scattered around, and it's again just a cells one which is inverted. Then an obligatory levels on it, and then we multi-directional warp it with the default noise. So multi-directional warp is actually a super cool effect. So you can see how that just starts to become a fluidy mess. And that way we get all these colors into it, somewhat like if a fluid is like some of moisture is trapped within the glass. I do justify that for myself like that. All right. After that, we do the edge, and I know all these layers might be a little bit intimidating, but it's actually fairly straightforward. So this is what the effect does. Just gives it some structure along the edge here. And how I did that is I did use the legacy distance mask solution with the bevel. So that way I get this. Then the levels, a blur slope with itself to just, yeah, levels would also be fine. Then we warp it with a Perlin noise, so we can see we get these super random swirlies again. Then another blur slope. And a directional blur to have it a bit more streaky towards the inner of the X head. And then I just took a fibrous map, which is also just a map you can grab from in here. And I just masked out the X head. And that's actually it. Actually quite straightforward. I hope so far it's quite okay to follow. I am very sorry if something seems a bit chaotic. It's I don't do this very often. All right, next effect is some obsidian thingy. I just call it that. And these are just some blurred lines that go across the whole body to give it a bit more depth. Which is again just an inverted cells 1 in obligatory levels. And then we warp it with a Perlin noise. So a Perlin noise is, can I actually show that? Yeah, so that is a Perlin noise. It's just some wavy black and white. Could we see? So we can, yes. So I can show you. So this is the reference that I got. All right. So we're warping it so we can really just swirl these values and make them a bit more fluid. Then another blur slope on it. Blur slope and warp are one of the most powerful tools you can get inside of Substance Painter and Designer actually. So yeah, then we get these random dragouts again. We put the blending mode to max because when we have that on blur, it just takes every value, and when we have that on min, it will just decrease the thickness. So I put that on max, so we really get all those bright values with it. And another blur slope, this time with itself, so you can see the with and without. So we drag those values out again, and we don't have these harsh and pointy lines anymore. Then another blur slope just to randomize it a bit more. And yeah, that way we get these little clumps here, for example. And it gives it a bit more depth, like we have some layers where the light refracts. All right, then off to the pick we go. Thank you for saving. So this is what the effect does. It is. It also has a bit of height. I can actually show it in the material view. So we do get some edge highlights and some more flintstony, or some more flintstony feel to it. So yeah, it's again cells inverted, then smoothed out with a bevel, because the smoothing here is a non-uniform blur that is a bit different to the regular blur, because it will also blur inwards. Then a multi-directional warp. The multi-directional warp in Painter actually works a bit different than the one in Designer. It always makes everything a lot brighter, and I don't know why actually, but we can work with it. Then a blur slope and a fill that multiplies just what I got below here. So this will be multiplied on top here, so we just contain the values a bit more, so they don't drag out too much. And yeah, isolated for the pick, and that's that. So at this point we need a bit more for the edges, so we first of all, this is what that does. And first of all, we do a curvature generator, then we slope blur that, and then we take a crunch galvanic large again and just subtract it over there. So we have some spots that are a bit thicker, some spots that are a bit thinner, and some where we don't have anything anymore. So it's not that uniform. Then we do a histogram scan and drag these values out so that they are perfectly contrasty. Then we do a non-uniform blur via the bevel, and we actually bevel these inwards a bit. Then a levels, just to, little quick levels adjustment. Then another slope blur and a clouds multiplied on top of it, so we don't have these perfectly white and black values. So that way we get a bit more blending within the other effects, because that just would look too harsh. Alright, then we have another curvature layer for this. This is actually just a little, just a little height adjust, so it's a bit more natural. Yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So it's here. So you actually just do a fill layer, and then you have the grayscale input here, okay? And let's just grab it from here. So let's just take the crunch concrete moss small. That actually looks very cool. Just drag and drop it in here. You can also just go from here and drag and drop these where you want, or even onto your fill layers. So you don't have to go in here and then drag and drop it in there. And then you have all these different blending modes just from here. So subtract, and then it will be subtracted, and you can also adjust the opacity of that effect. Perfect. All right, then we went over this. Okay, at this point, I put down a pass node. So the pass node actually records everything up until this point. Oh, and let's just turn this off, because I forgot to mention one very important thing. Because we do have on this part, I actually also incorporated some height, and that is quite important later on for this part here. Because when we don't have this, we don't have this effect. So this is going to be a bit more advanced. So I forgot to showcase that. This is a pass-through layer. And a pass-through layer is just a layer where every channel of the material is turned off, and every single one of these channels is put to pass-through. Okay, so you can do that by just going here and then pass-through, and then just right-click on it, apply to all channels. And what that will do is this will become sort of like an adjustment layer, where everything that is below here will be stored inside of that layer. Okay, so you can see we do get a map generated from that. And that way we can have all the informations from before. So the height, the normal, the base color, the roughness, everything we can just reference anywhere. And many generators have a function that is called micro details. And micro details works by referencing the normal and the height usually, but you can do anything. You can also reference your base color in it, which can also lead to some cool effects. So let's say we reference the base color here. So we get a few different effects. Okay, so this is just a curvature generator, and the curvature is it takes, wait, can we just go in here? All right, so you can see we do get some brighter areas where we have some concave edges, okay, and we get darker areas where we have convex areas, or the other way around. I always interchange them. But yeah, and that map will be used to determine the mask that we are drawing out from the curvature node. And the micro height and micro normal will just influence that with everything that we have below it. So the height will then be incorporated into the curvature calculations, so you can make your own sort of pseudo-baked effects inside of Substance Painter, okay? So many things you don't have to bake anymore. You can just use anchor points and micro details to get the exact same effect that you would have with a sculpted bake and the generator. So yeah, that's how I got this random effect, which is super important. since it gives a bit more of these blurred gap closures, which then again just makes it feel like it has a bit more layers to it. Okay, this one is not used. This one is used. So this is just a curvature with a bevel and a blur slope, a very harsh blur slope with a bit of less quality. So the quality is technically the sample size. And sometimes less quality will give you more interesting effects. So it's not always like, yeah, we'll crank the quality and we get the best effect. And then just multiply the clouds on it so we have a bit more variation in that. And that then gives us these drags out here. Okay, and that is... Ah, I forgot this one. So I do... Sorry. I do have these effects on it as well. Again, just the cells, levels, and a multi-directional warp, so we get swirly patterns. Nothing new on that. So yeah, this is how we get this base color. And now onto the magic, because as you can see, we have some... This does not look like the end result that we had. And now this folder is for that, okay? So there's the copper gold mix, yada yada yada, that I made. It's just the bronze armor, and then the gold, which one? We made that for my katana back in the days. The gold damaged is also in there, or the gold armor. I don't know it anymore. And there is some very interesting effect in there, which is this finish rough. Okay. So this finish rough is the effect that actually gives us this this super fancy effect. Sadly, you won't be able to have that anymore since since it's an outdated version and they updated that, and the newer version doesn't look that great. But you can find it under the filters, and then here we have these matte finishes rough, okay? And then just ratio. Maybe we can. Nice job. Yeah, sadly it's just too, too streaky. So we won't really get that effect anymore. We can, oh, we could actually slope blur it. Then we get a different effect. So with a bit of playing around, we might be able to achieve a similar effect. But yeah, that's how you achieve that glass material. I hope that was somewhat helpful. And are there any questions? Yes, I can change that to red glass by just going in here and have a filter, and then I can just make it red, and same up here. I did not mean for the color to change that drastically, so I have to put down 2. Wait. Yeah. Okay, never mind. Yeah, so we can put it like this. This is being recorded simultaneously, yes. So yeah, we can also make it blue. I do see some green in there still. I don't know why, actually. But yeah. Blue also looks quite funky. This is Substance Painter. It is, unfortunately, it is a paid program. Costs, you only get it, you either get it in the, you either get it on Steam for, I think, 155, which is a perpetual license, and you get 1 year of free updates with that. Or you get it within the Substance Adobe suite, where you will get Substance Designer, Painter, and Sampler, and like 30-ish downloads of their Adobe assets. So if you want software, I would definitely go with the subscription. It costs around 200 a year, because in the Adobe assets there are a lot of SBS files where you can take a look at the graphs of the Substance Designer file, and that can help you very much. So, any other questions? Yes, Mari is a great tool. I personally have never used it, but a colleague of mine loves it very much. But it is also, as far as I've seen, it's also not the most user-friendly one. So, yeah, then I would go over to showing you how we can do these kind of ornaments. Which is a fairly hacky technique. And I will just quickly go over the workflow that I used to create something like these leaf ornaments. We will be making a simpler version of them, because quite frankly, those are pretty intricate and it would take a while to do those. But yeah, let's just hop right into it. So, oops. So here we are in Blender, and I just put up some reference that I used for these. And there are some basic things I need to go over with you before we start. So we need to activate a few add-ons, which are loop tools. These are in Blender by default, but they are not activated by default, so they are actually hiding some very good plugins, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And F2, all right? I will explain what they do in a second. But yeah, to do these, we'll just start out with a plane, be in vertex mode, and delete everything, and then control right click to make a vertex. And we want to have a subdivision modifier on it. And personally, I like to activate the on cage setting, because what that does is it will give you a live preview of how your subdivision behaves. So with and without. And when we have a lot of these, this can quickly become quite confusing. So I like to use these, but they need a bit of practice to get used to. So they are like Bezier curves or the bungee tool in Adobe Illustrator, if that helps you. So we'll just trace. Oops. So we'll just trace these. Maybe Control-Shift-B to bevel the vertice. So yeah, Control-Shift-B. So we get so technically this is what we'll do with that, and then we can also increase that part. But let's just do it like this. And then just trace it. So yeah, after that, because we're using these in ZBrush, we don't really need to be that clean on the topology. It actually doesn't matter at all. And you can see I'm filling in these faces very fast. And this is the F2 plugin. So you just select this edge, and then you go up with your mouse and just press F. And that way you can also, it's also meant for retopology, so you can just create squares off of it. Like so. Oops. And then we'll just do it like this, and then hold Control and just trace this. So we make a huge N-gon, but we don't care about it at all. And so we have our first leaf. Then we'll just put a solidify modifier on it, apply the scale, and put the subdivision under it, all right? So then we'll shade it smooth, and not having it this much, let's just have it 0.03, 0.04. Your mileage may vary, so yeah, but that way we get our first leaf. So then we'll just take one vertice, Shift D, select it, press P, separate by selection, and then we'll just turn off the solidify, and we'll start from here. So another thing that you might want to use if you're not using the on cage setting is, or subdivision in general, is to use loop tools. So loop tools, when you right click, will be on top of here, and there you have some very neat little things. I will not go over all of them now, such as relax, and that way you can have nicer curves with your polygons. I just like to use relax, and then you have, oops, relax, and then you have this little section under here, and there you can even set the iterations, but I like to just set it to something like 5 and then press Shift R a couple of times, because that will just repeat the latest action. So I can just hold it and have a nice clean curve. But with that method, you need to go into preferences and then system, and there you have to increase the undo steps. I think it's 32 by default. You can just set it to 256, all right? Because that way you can always go back. But yeah. Oops. Let's go further. I will just do 3 leaves for now. That was not the correct way. I will also do it a bit rough now, just to show the schematic of it. Like so, and then we'll begin to, oops. That is not the correct way. Like so, then make a big n-gon again. Holding down Control will actually just select the shortest path. So when you go from here to here, it will select the shortest path, not the outline. So sometimes you gotta be a bit careful with this. And then just go down again. Looks fine. Maybe I want to have this bit like so. And shade it smooth and put it behind. That is quite important. And I also want to make this curve a bit nicer. And then on to the last one. Oops. So yeah, I really want to emphasize, sorry, that topology is none of our concerns, because we'll be using ZBrush, and there we will just Z-remesh it or dynamesh it or whatever helps us achieve our goal. Like so. And then go on top here, and then like so. Like so. All right, that was the last leaf. And now we will just export them to ZBrush. then we will just look for them. Oh yeah, there was that issue, but we don't really care about that. We can just flip these. All right. So, what we want to do is we want to start by having usable topology to sculpt on. So we'll go down into the geometry tab and just draw a zero measure. And I think that actually looks quite fine. So what I like to do, and I see I probably made them a bit too thin, but doesn't matter. Doesn't really matter. So I like to use the madcap pearl cavity, because when I go along with the trim dynamic, I can see the edges a bit more. And then I like to just make an artificial bevel, and please be sure to switch to the orthographic view. So we'll just quickly run down here. I will do it very messy. Like so. And then we'll take a look at how our ornaments are made. So if you don't have a second monitor, you can just bring yourselves some reference in here via texture import, and then you just import a texture or a picture, and then select this as the active one, and then add to Spotlight. Okay, so Spotlight will then give you this. You can rotate it, you can scale it, you can make it transparent, you can do whatever. But be sure to isolate the part that you want, okay? Because otherwise you will have all these other stuff, and that can be quite distracting. But I actually do not need that, because I do in fact have a second monitor here. So I can just take a look at how I want to manipulate them. So we'll just switch to the damn standard brush and increase the lazy mouse. And then we'll just do something like, and also maybe the lazy step to something like 0.025. Yeah, that works. So it's a bit trial and error sometimes. Yeah, something like this. And then we want to go from here and then just up down here. Like so maybe. Then we go on with the edge polish, so we can increase the edges on these smooth surfaces a bit more, and we can also negate some of these. So something like this, and then we'll take the move brush, and when you hold down Alt and then go up or down, left or right, you see it will be moved via its via your camera angle. I also do not know why I do get these weird artifacts on my mouse here, so please bear with me. So yeah, that way you can get a curve in it. So then again, zero measure, subdividing it, and we might also want to just isolate it, and then do something like this. I might want to decrease the intensity. By the way, lazy mouse will be dragging after your mouse, so you make move the curves. Maybe something like this. Oh, let's start with this one. Okay. And then something like this. And typically I actually start with the bevel around it, but it doesn't really matter. Okay. We'll just chisel away here, then go on over here. Maybe also with the paintbrush we can bit, then go over the VH polish so we get a bit more variation, a bit more randomization, so it's not that perfect. We're not that skilled of a craftsman. And then we'll just put it in, dump it in, and on to our last one. Isolated. So I need to just cut this off. So, and then drag this into here. And by dragging it just across it, we can get the illusion, sort of an illusion, as if it were twisted. But if we really want it to be twisted, we can also just go into the brushes and use spiral. And I do know what will happen, so I'll just mask off this part here and blur it a bit. So then when we go from under it, we can increase the brush scale and then have it twist. All right. So go in here and here, smooth that one. And then we'll just drag it out. Like so. And that way we have some cool 3D ornaments. And what we want to do now is we'll go to document, and this is a bit sketchy, so to say. I did not quite figure out how to really use it, so I'll just double the size, then Control N, dragging it out, go to edit, and then we'll have a doubled document. Up here we can actually see how our viewport is translating to our document resolution. So this part is now irrelevant to what we want to do next. So we'll just scale it according to this, and then we'll go to alpha, drag it in here, and then bus relief. All right, so bus relief is a super cool function, and we'll just hit bus relief. There is some good documentation about what all these settings actually do on ZBrush site. And then we can just go into subtool and then append a plane 3D and subdivide this a couple of times and go to standard, drag rectangular, and then use this one. And now we can see what it does, okay? And I think this is actually quite good. Maybe I want to just take this down by half and then deselect this and make a new bus relief, not apply bus relief, because this will then recalculate it, and usually we don't really want that. So make bus relief again. Take a look at this. And now the first one. Okay, we can see slight differences. But yeah, let's just take the first one. Then we'll just export this as a TIFF. You can't see it, but an export window will open then. And then we want to go into an image editing software. When you do it correctly with your document size and set it to 1 by 1 in the first place in ZBrush, then you don't have to do that. And then we'll just drag and drop this in. And we'll just make it 1 by 1. Export it. Then we can go back into Substance Painter. And this is why I like to do it this way. Because down here, I have all my ornaments in one setup. And I think, yeah, this is the one I use for the blade. And if I were to think I don't like it really much, so I can just make a new bas relief in ZBrush. I don't have to sculpt it again. So I can just take another grayscale input or another texture that we made now and exchange this scale it accordingly. And now we can see we have a new ornament in here. And so this way it is just very, very modular, very iterative, so you can just play around, and it is very non-destructive, which is by these intricate works is just what you want. I also got asked how I can have these fit the space so well, and that is actually just again with the warp projection. There we have the option to edit the vertices, and we can just cut it. It's like a lattice, okay? So we can split this, and that way we get more vertices and manipulator. So we get more points to manipulate it. So you can just drag this out, and you can see it will be dragged with it. So that way I can just warp it the way I need. And yeah, that is how I made all these. I really like that we do get some, depth perception here where they overlap. So yeah, that was that. I hope you liked that. Also, I hope so sorry. I hope you liked this little showcase of how I made all these or about my workflow, and maybe I'll do another tutorials on how to do certain things. Bye!